Hello, I'm Mischievous Mark Ginocchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, Amazing Fantasy number 15, and of course all of the annuals, which I say do not count. You know, Dan, I was on Instagram today, and I posted the Amazing Spider-Man Ends of the Earth one-shot, and I was brought back to a time where we used to fight over things like that, and then I got Amazing Fantasy number 15, and I was like, I don't have to have these fights anymore.
Fair enough. I'm surprised my spider sense didn't go off with you posting that. I'll have to check that out. Well, I am Dapper Dan Gavoston, and I too own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which I say count because I believe it, but also to kind of like fuel this ongoing feud with you, Mark. And I will say, I have a new comic book shop now that I've moved to Baltimore. And I went into their like catalog to basically like book, get to manage my pull list. And I was like, oh, let me add the annuals. And they don't exist because he includes them with the regular series. So, feather in my cap, as it were, for that. But I thought of you, Mark, during that process. But alas, for me, at the end of all of this, Amazing Fantasy 15 remains a fantasy. Mark, I hope you're enjoying it.
I just appreciate after 11 years of this that, because my local comic book shop has started doing that too, where they include the annuals. They did not always include the annuals, but we have a new person managing the pull list, and he said, of course the annuals are part of the regular series. And I'm like, but then he did say, but I know a lot of people don't feel that way. So
maybe he listened to our interview with Tom Brevoort, where he came down very hard on your opinion about this.
It's very possible, but
you may have Amazing Fantasy 15, but I have culture on my side.
You have culture and the executive editor of Marvel. Well, welcome to the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe, those that count and do not count. Thanks for joining us for this review episode of the Amazing Spider Talk.
If you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app and leave us a review to help spread the word about our show.
This podcast exists because of the support of our Patreon members. If you want to receive early episodes, exclusive artwork, and of course, keep this podcast going, go to AmazingSpiderTalk.com and consider joining our Patreon.
Today on the show, Mark and I are going to be discussing Amazing Spider-Man Volume 6, number 55. This issue is written by Zeb Wells. The cover features artwork by John Romita Jr., Scott Hanna, and Marcio Menyz. Inventory cover, but still a cool one. The interior pages feature art by Emilio Laiso, colors by Bryan Valenza, and of course letters by VC's Joe Caramagna. This issue was first released on August 14th, 2024. All right, Mark, let's start this off. I want to go back to our previous review where I think at the very end of the review I said, hey, we're getting a one-shot next time. It's going to be a standalone bridge issue. I'm really looking forward to it because it's bound to be good, which is something like crazy to say after you just got done kind of trashing a comic book.
Right.
And yet, here we are. It's the bridge episode with a standalone kind of story in Amazing Spider-Man written by Zeb Wells. And what do you know? All of the things that we ding this book for not doing are present in this issue. It reads like a great, issue of Amazing Spider-Man. I mean, great might even be too much to give this issue. It reads like what you want Amazing Spider-Man to be. It's one of those, meaning something that we got every issue of Amazing Spider-Man just about. And this one has some really nice touches to it. But here it is right before us. Zeb Wells can do it. Why aren't we getting this all the time?
Yeah, I don't know, Dan. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that there is just this infatuation with this title of telling these long-form stories, which, hey, look, the the history of Amazing Spider-Man is filled with these long form stories that go on for 6 or 7 issues sometimes, and many times they're quite excellent. I don't want to make it sound like, it has to be a done in one for it to be a good story. With that said, I get the sense that these one shot issues, if you will, these standalone stories, Zeb Wells has the opportunity to actually focus on the story here and focus on the characters. I think one of the big things that Marvel, in terms of its Spider-Man line, is suffering from right now is just this desire to just kind of get attention and grab eyeballs and be as outrageous as possible. And it's really been the one-shots where they've been more subdued stories. And subdued, for whatever reason, in Marvel Spider Office parlance, is getting inside Peter's head and telling a Peter story. And I think that's also where we're at with a lot of this. I mean, we've had a couple of one-shots that, I'm thinking of the, what was the storyline from with the Gwen on the cover?
The Judgment Day issue,
which I thought was also a solid tie-in to Judgment Day, but we dealt a little bit with like Peter and Norman, but it was told from Peter's perspective, and like that seems to be what's really missing. I mean, we just had a 6-issue arc that wrapped up with the Spider Goblin, where for I would say about 75% of the story, Peter was not of the right mind, and thus there was no point being inside his head because it wasn't Peter. It was this, Norman Osborn. It was a Norman Osborn story that Peter was a guest star in. So that would be like my simplified way of what went right here versus what seems to be going wrong with these longer form stories.
And, getting back to where Zeb Wells came from in regards to Spider-Man, like he was part of the Brand New Day team. And issues like this were like regular issues in the Brand New Day format. And you and I talk very positively about Brand New Day. I mean, not all of it was a grand slam, but enough of it was good, and it was constant enough, 3 books a month, that if something didn't work for you, you moved on, mostly because they were 1 or 2 issue long stories. And there were some longer ones like New Ways to Die and stuff like that. But they really had to justify themselves to kind of take up that space. And, I just think that if you haven't read Brand New Day and you just kind of are coasting on what you've heard about One More Day and all that, you're really missing out on an era that lived in this particular format. And I think it's where Zeb is best and seems most comfortable and clearly is being allowed to tell the story he wants to tell without needing to set up a bunch of other stuff. And maybe we'll never know what all of the kind of leanings are on him. But when you see the contrast between something like this and something like these major stories we've been getting, it couldn't be more stark. I mean, this opens with pages of Peter swinging around the city thinking to himself. When was the last time that we got one of those? I know it's like Alan likes to beat that horse, but because it used to be a staple of this series. As soon as I opened it, I knew we were in a good place. Monologuing, swinging through the city, grounded, clear storytelling that doesn't have crazy MacGuffins and secret scrolls. I mean, I love stuff like this. And I think it's true for people online. I mean, yes, there's the normal insane places of Spider-Man fans online that saw the final image of this, or one of the final images of this book of Shay and Peter kissing, and we're ready to burn an effigy of Nick Lowe and Zeb Wells. But everywhere else I've been, people are rapturous about this story and are like, please, why can't we get more of this? Right. So why are we not? Is it because they need to goose sales to keep their jobs? If so, then maybe the incentivization structure needs to be changed.
Yeah, I really don't. I mean, I don't know exactly the why here, Dan. All I can do is kind of, look at the situation and speculate a little bit. I mean, the fact of the matter is, we, like you said, we, Available Alan talks about it. We talk about it a lot, but it's it comes down to the fact that like we are in an era of Spider-Man, and this is not just a Zeb Wells thing. This has been going on for years now, where it seems like more often than not, the creators working on this book are the character they are least interested in telling stories about is Peter Parker, and I don't understand why anyone in their right mind would take a gig to write Amazing Spider-Man and then say, yeah, but I really don't want to focus on Peter. You know, like and I don't know if that's because it's coming from on high or because, they don't know what stories to tell with Peter anymore. I mean, look, like we've had Peter on a date before, and we've had Peter with other women before and be successful with them, not just Mary Jane or Gwen Stacy. So yeah, you're telling that story again, but like because of frankly just how down in the dumps this book has been for the better part of this entire run, like I got to admit, like I was kind of like touched by the ending. It was like, hey, look, Peter's getting a win, and it doesn't feel like the rug is going to be pulled out from him. I mean, I expect like this relationship to be perfect and to last forever? No, of course not. There will be Spider-Man things that interfere and make this challenging, if not end it completely in due time. But in the interim, it's like it's nice to see Peter get the win, so that when he gets the loss eventually, it'll sting more. Like this is the ebbs and flows and cyclical nature of a continuing story that is Amazing Spider-Man. But yeah, I mean, do you have any speculation as to why they don't want to tell stories about Peter, Dan? Do you? I don't get it.
Well, I mean, I think there was like a kind of it's not even a meta arc, like an A-level arc to this this entire run, which is the whole idea of like that like Peter has like fallen into the world of Spider-Man to avoid his sadness.
Yeah.
In the wake of MJ and all of that stuff, right? And I think that becomes text in this issue, which is like, you gotta take care of yourself. Like you can't, you gotta have some things for yourself. And I don't know how much I buy it. I think I buy it for this issue. It's a really solid single issue. Do I think that this is like enough of a rationale to cover up why we haven't seen Peter in forever in this title? I don't think so. I mean, Zeb gives it some lip service here and there, but I think if this was like a really important thing to him and the core of what he wanted to say in this arc, it would come up every time he put the Spider-Man suit on. Yeah. That tension of I'm leaving Peter behind to go do this. So like, I think there's been enough lip service to it for it to work in this issue, but I don't think it like gets them out of the doghouse of being like, yeah, you get to ignore Peter for most of the run. I don't think they've done enough like narrative work to make that totally land.
Yeah. I mean, I can't disagree with a single thing you just said. I mean, it's very good in this issue, and like you said, the breadcrumbs of this idea are, can be found if you go hunting, closely enough throughout the last 55 issues of this book. But it's really not the centerpiece of it. I mean, like they could say it's the centerpiece, but it's not in terms of you actually look within the contents of the book, which is, I think, a shame, because this is something quite interesting. It's a good concept. I mean, one of the greatest single issues of Spider-Man of all time, like its entire foundation is on that concept. The second Raimi movie does its entire arc around that issue. You know what I mean? Like I'm talking about Spider-Man No More, number ASM 50. Like we don't. It's a great concept, and I think it's one of the cores of who is Spider-Man, who is Peter Parker, like what is, and yet, like, just being like every once in a while in an issue like this, like, oh, I gotta pay lip service to this element of the character. It doesn't do it justice if you're not reinforcing that struggle and that conflict and that drama time and time again. Like we got it a little bit during the Dead Languages arc, at least through the first half of it. But it really has not been front and center in this arc, and I don't know why. Like clearly, like you said, like you've been saying this whole episode, Dan, Zeb Wells knows it's an important theme. Zeb Wells knows how to execute on that theme, and yet we can't get it consistently. And I can't wrap my head around why that's the case. I mean, I can cast aspersions about editorial and all that kind of stuff, but like I don't even know if it's that. You know what I mean? Like that almost seems too easy at this point, because this has been going on and on and on with other creators for so long, and it's just like, okay, like I can't imagine that like Marvel editorial is saying don't tell stories about Peter Parker. I feel that, you know, there are bigger issues at play that, you know, that's making creators say I can tell this story, but XYZ is going to happen if I do that. So I can only do that, you know, in an opportunity like this, like a cooldown issue, you know?
Yeah, and I really like this issue, to like get back to this particular issue. But I think like the final like image of him and Shay together should be like an all-time moment of redemption for Peter. And I know you said like this is the first like kind of win for him in a long time. You know, the end of Amazing Spider-Man Volume 6, number 25, which is the like penultimate issue of the Dead Languages, ends with him like finding out that MJ has moved on from him despite still loving him. And he walks out, you know, into that like courtyard outside of the hospital and encounters the Fantastic Four and like shrugs them off and basically kind of like collapses, you know, into the courtyard. And like I can't think of a darker, I mean there's plenty of dark moments for Peter, but like emotionally that is like one of the lowest moments for the character in the book's history. You know, for Peter especially, right?
Yeah.
Like more, it's a Peter moment, and like this should be the exact counter to that. Is like, here's a guy who lost everything, all of his hope, no matter how contrived you think the MJ splitting up with him was, because it is just about as forced as One More Day was. There was drama to be had there. And here he finally is on the upswing. Someone has talked him into the opposite. Actually take care of yourself. And it's beautiful within this issue. But boy, I would have loved to have seen the in-between where Peter is like pushing off getting himself help or diving into Spider-Man to avoid that pain so that this moment could really sing.
Yeah, I mean, my one counter to that is like one of the things that I truly enjoyed about this comic and why I truly think it was as clear cut of a happy ending as you can get in this book these days is the fact that like the action and Peter's you know, decisiveness here was not colored by anything having to do with the tragedy that befell him earlier in this arc. Like I like the fact that this book was completely divorced of MJ and Paul and like, well, if she's moving on, I need to move on and you know, or I need to give myself a shot and do better for myself. Like I think that's because I think if you insert that into this, and I know you're not saying necessarily to insert that into the story, but like I think it's worth saying. I think if you kind of bring up the MJ of it all here, like I think that ultimately brings the moment down, because then you're coloring Peter's actions with is he truly doing this out of a purity? You know, I know I'm not pure, but like, is he really acting on you know what he wants to do and his instinct, or is he doing this because he's trying to force the issue of trying to remediate his own pain? You know, does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree with that, but I also think like there's a moment in this comic, and we'll get into the details of it. But while we're talking about it, let's get into it. Where Peter goes into the alley to change into his Spider-Man costume after like basically rejecting Shay, and you know suggesting that like Spider-Man takes precedent over you know everything else in his life. Which if that had been reinforced by him doing that throughout the run, like watching him zip up the outfit where he looks down at his like protruding belly, which I thought was a really funny image in this comic. Mm-hmm. Like I guess I wanted to feel that this was Peter Parker's breaking point enough that he almost like psychotically runs out into the street in his like civilian attire to stop Rhino and Screwball, that he's just had it and he needs to take her advice. And I don't feel like that it was like it's not a crescendo we built to, even if I buy the moment, because I think it is very like he's earned that over 949 issues of this comic. But if it had been a through line of Zeb's run in the wake of like MJ's departure, I think that break for him would have been even stronger for me as a reader.
Right. Well, I mean, if I'm hearing you right, what you're describing is the work that really needed to be done in the issues preceding this one, not the issue itself. And that's correct. And I agree with you there. I wanted to, in the context of this singular issue, I had a real appreciation for the fact that it wasn't weighted down by, it's been a hard year for me, and like everything's gone wrong for me, because to me it's like it's always hard for Peter, and I'm not saying like it shouldn't have put that work in the lead, because that's the thing, it hasn't always come across that it's been hard for Peter over the last year. It's just that he's not happy, and the storytelling has been very dour as a through line, but like you haven't necessarily seen that. We had a gang war that had very little to do with Peter. We had this breakup, if you will, with Norman that we just got through, that really felt kind of divorced from Peter's actual emotions to this whole thing, that he's been trusting this guy for so long and now he doesn't. So it's poor storytelling in the lead up, and yet at the same time I was just like, oh man, like don't give me the Peter Felicia, I love her like a sister talk, because like I don't want that, like that was a disaster the first time, don't ever do it again, like.
Well, I want to get back to what you said earlier, which is like we've seen a date issue like this before, but I think that this issue really gives Peter a unique challenge that I have not seen in this comic before. And the way it can do that is by really getting Peter. Like, I think this is a really brilliant display of like who Peter Parker is as a person. There's a moment in this where she asks Peter, like, do you want to be here? And he says, I want to be here. And then his glance, like in a silent panel, he just looks out the window before there's anything to look at. And you can tell he's clearly distracted. And I thought, like, man, that is Peter Parker. It's not even that there is something out there for him to go and solve. It's that he is so drilled into this mindset of his responsibility. Yes. Yeah. I thought that was a really great moment. Yeah. This and to counter my own point, I do think this whole idea of like, will you make me a priority, which is what Shay challenges him to, goes all the way back to even like, and don't hate me, Mark, to one moment in time where Peter doesn't make MJ a priority over Spider-Man and ends up like missing their wedding, which kind of kicks off that whole new timeline. And so like Peter choosing this, like, it's almost like a heel from all the way back to that, and you could say even before then, because Peter's doing this kind of stuff all the time. I think but the thing that also kind of like, and I know you didn't want to inject MJ into this, and I don't think you had to like show her in any way, but I think if the reason that she was like stuck in another dimension for that time gap was because Peter put a priority on Spider-Man over MJ, rather than her sacrificing herself to save Spider-Man, I feel like you could have come up with an arc that really closed here, which is like Peter choosing to change his behavior with a new love interest. you don't need to hang the whole arc on this particular issue, but this does feel like an issue that's meant to be a heel for like something that Peter has been struggling with for the entire run, maybe even longer.
I think that's probably good. It's probably better long form storytelling that they did that. But like, I got to be honest with you, Dan. I mean, like, as you know, as much as we've kind of pushed back against, you know, the fans that kind of froth at the mouth about, you know, what's happened in this book over the past couple of years, I feel like they kind of set that up with, you know, with what you're suggesting. Like that's really kind of putting a thumb in their eyes. I don't know if that's for the long-term health of this book and this fandom a great choice. I guess that's all I would say to that.
Yeah, but I do think that, I mean, like, even the stories that people like to quote, you know, as the best Peter MJ stories are not ones where Peter necessarily puts MJ first. I'll even go back to Craven's Last Hunt. Like, you know, he left his wife alone in an apartment. You know, like, I think it's the history of the character is that he's dashing out the window. I mean, Spider-Man 2 it ends with, you know, she's accepting of it, but like, you know, his priority will always be with Spider-Man. That's kind of, I don't think it's that much of an aberration for the character, but you're right. Anything that might get people angry is going to. But you know, in terms of healing this arc, you know, maybe Shay isn't the one to go to bat for, but you know, I love this issue, and I would love it even more if I felt like it was a logical endpoint to something that had been set up much earlier. Although emotionally, it still mostly worked for me. All right, well, let's talk about Shay in a moment, because I really like this character and how she's presented in this issue. But we got to talk about the Slack first, Mark.
We got to talk about the Slack because hundreds of listeners like you hang out in our community of Spider-Man fans on Slack. The amazing Spider Slack community is absolutely free to join, and you can jump into active conversations with awesome people about collecting, conventions, movies, new comics, old comics, and more. Dan, what has been happening in the Slack this week?
Well, Mark, I've really been thrilled to read everyone's responses to our Ultimate Spider-Man review that we did. It really got people talking, and I think it seems like there's more people that have a similar feeling to what you and I felt about it than I think we were expecting. I don't think it's even has to do with us kind of setting any kind of tone or expectation. I think people are kind of feeling very similar about us with the book, which is really wanting to love it and finding some resistance to that.
Sure.
So speaking of really wanting to love something, no, I'm kidding. We got a new Kraven the Hunter trailer this week, and that lit the Slack on fire. Mark, did you watch that thing yet?
So I gotta tell you, I was out in a restaurant earlier this week, and it was on the TV on mute, and I have not watched it not on mute yet. But my wife was standing next to me, and I was like, "Oh yeah, there's the new Kraven the Hunter trailer," and it was definitely like a record scratch moment for my wife, who's not like does not follow things remotely as closely, but like knows enough to know who Kraven the Hunter is, and like she's like, "Wait, what?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's a Kraven the Hunter movie, except Spider-Man's not in it." And she's like, "Say what?" And then she's like, what is this, like George of the Jungle or something? I'm like, look, I don't know. But so I'm assuming you watched it with sound. So did I miss much without the sound? I guess that's my question for you.
No, there's like a, you know, one of those slow iterations of a pop song playing throughout it, which has become all of the rage. The Rhino shows up
yes.
in it. I'm sure you saw that kind of very haunted image. But you know, like my joke I made in the Slack was like they're trying to sell it as Sergey Wick, and the action looks pretty fun. I'm sure the movie is going to be terrible, but them selling it like with the action, like it kind of sold me. It looked like cleverly staged, and like there would be a good pace to this thing. And I'm sure I'm gonna eat those words. but it looked better than like Madam Web or Morbius. Like it looked like a actual like action movie. But I say that knowing that in the previous trailer we watched him like have like a lion bleed into him, and he got powers from like a radioactive lion. So, feel free to argue with me in several months when this finally comes out. I'm probably going to go check this out in the theaters. I have more morbid curiosity for this than I did for Madam Web and Morbius, both of which I haven't seen.
I was going to say, the only one of these Sony non-Spider-Man movies I've seen is the first Venom. And I thought that movie was just bonkers and not in a great way. So I still haven't seen the second Venom, nor have I seen Morbin Time or, My Father Was in the Jungle, Madam Web, or whatever the line is. That
Are you going to see Venom Last Dance just for the Venom horse?
I guess I got to see Let There Be Carnage or whatever it's called. I mean, Dan, there's a lot of movies on my to watch list, and I kind of want to get through the ones that I'm going to enjoy first instead of the ones I'm going to hate. Like hate watching is a special art form, and I don't even know if these movies are worth hate watching. But sorry, I don't mean to kind of rain on the parade of people who are like, no, these are great hate watches, or I actually like this. But that's just kind of been my impression of these movies so far.
I thought Venom was a really fun hate watch, or borderline enjoyable watch for whatever the hell Tom Hardy is doing. But anyway, come join in the fun on our amazing Slack. We're talking about all of this stuff and more. There's a link to the Slack in the description of this episode, and it'll let you sign up lickety split. All right, so speaking of, let's get back to the action here. This issue concludes with Peter confronting Rhino and Screwball. What do you think of this whole interaction?
I mean, it was, like you said kind of earlier, I don't know how earned this moment actually is based on what preceded it, but it in a vacuum, it was a really fun and kind of cathartic moment, because it's like, hey, he's taken a new approach, because he's kind of, whether it's been told well enough through the story or not, like you said, it's kind of his breaking point. And I for the beats of this specific comic, I like that he did it. I like that he did it, and I like that they responded the way they did. I like that Screwball and Rhino were sympathetic to it, or at least Screwball was, and Rhino was just kind of like, I don't know what's going on, but whatever. And it worked, even if it's just in the confines of this one comic. I don't think this is something I would like to see frequently, but as a kind of a dramatic crescendo here, it works.
Yeah, I thought it was plenty of fun. I think maybe they leaned into the whole apps, dating apps, don't they stink, a little too much.
Right.
Maybe just end the comic with the kiss. I don't know that I need to return to those characters and what's going on in their dating lives, especially for Rhino, whose most famous modern story is about the love of his life being murdered. But in a comic like this, I don't think you necessarily need to lean too heavily on history. I do think there was probably a moment there for more fun with the physical intimidation that Rhino presents against an average human being sticking his finger in his face. But I thought it was plenty of fun and exactly the kind of levity, breaking moment for Peter that this book needed. So let's talk about Shay, whose last name apparently is Markin.
I mean, she's got 4 good letters in there. I'm just gonna say.
So Shay Markin, the reason for Peter making this dramatic change. I really like this character, Mark. What's your take on Shay?
I need to know more, I think, about her, but she's I like her too. There's a maturity to Shay that and I like how, again, at least in the context of this comic, her maturity is kind of, it's bringing out the best in Peter. It's getting Peter to be more reflective than I think he's been in quite some time. Like, not even just like going even beyond the Zeb Wells arc, frankly. But at the same time, like, you know, like I feel like we've gotten this a couple of times over the years with like the non MJ, Gwen, Felicia love interests, where they're, you know, these characters are kind of introduced as like these, you know, larger than life, you know, seismic choice, you know, like characters, if you will, and you know, there's no momentum that's like maintained with them, and I guess that's what, you know, like even Shay, I think, like, you know, she shows up during the what was it, the Sandman slash Anna Watson and Ravencroft arc,
Right.
and you know, I liked her quite a lot there, and then it's been kind of on ice for, you know, and I know other things were going on, but like, you know, maybe this is a character if you check in on during Spider Goblin, if you intend to develop her some more, you know, like maybe she's trying to call Peter for, you know, to set up coffee or something, and he answers as the Spider Goblin, you know, like maybe that's a scene, you know, like I don't know. I'm just saying, like I would like, if we're really gonna go there with her, you know, to use her words, if we're gonna do this, then I think, you know, they got to start putting more of the work in.
Yeah, no, the book needs to do it. It needs to commit to, this is a thing we're doing. I do think, like, if she were to disappear, you know, after a couple more appearances, I think she served her purpose really well within this story.
Yeah.
That being said, I do think there's a really interesting angle with her working at Ravencroft, you know, that could follow up on some, you know, threads that have been dangled before, which is like, hey, I keep arresting these guys, like, let's check in with their mental health, you know. And I think there could be a really interesting, you know, sort of like, you know, exploration of rehabilitation for Spider-Man's enemies, and finding some stories there, if that's something they're willing to commit to. 'Cause she's got it built in the same way that Carly Cooper had it built in, which she's like, yeah, I'm on the police force. Okay, cool. Like, yeah, that makes her tied closely to Spider-Man in some way. Yeah, like, there are ways to work them into the story.
Tied closely, yet very independent, which I think is important.
One of my favorite moments in this is where she asked Peter to tell her why he is a black guy, why he's late. And he says, I'm going to tell you the truth. I can't tell you. Yeah. And she accepts that. I thought that was a maturation for Peter, who would have, like, you know, with Carly Cooper, he would just straight up lied to her. And then that blew up in his face. Yeah. This is I've never seen him acknowledge that he has a secret to someone before, or, like, you know, a love interest before, and then have them accept that. I think that's really interesting, and I hope we get more down that line. You know, and that she accepts it says a lot about Shay, that she's, like, very much an adult and accepts that people have lives outside of her own, and that she doesn't have an immediate, you know, into other people's psyches and what they're safeguarding.
Right.
I think maybe someone showing up with a black eye and telling you, I can't tell you why, is problematic, but you know, she lives in a world of superheroes, so who knows what she thinks. But to me, like, all of these little kind of character beats of her, like, challenging him or saying, like, I'm not going to stick around if you're not, you know, in this. You need to take care of yourself, you know, and having that discussion about responsibility. Like, I don't know much about her, and I'm very interested to learn more, but it set a really interesting angle that I don't think we've ever seen from a love interest for Peter Parker.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the Carly Cooper comparison, frankly, is quite apt overall, but I also, like I said to you earlier, the maturity of her as a character, like, you know, I just hope we're not setting up that she's got a dark past either, because I don't know how useful that is. You know what I mean? Like I kind of like that. You know, like let's. She can be complex without being complicated, if that makes sense. Yeah. And I would prefer to keep it that way than rather than like, oh, I'm a reformed supervillain or whatever. I don't know. Like, I'm just like,
I mean, I'm okay with her having some civilian related thing. Like Carly Cooper, you know, she had the whole like, you know, like relationship with Lily and their sort of adopted father and her father who was on the police force that was corrupt. Like that was all interesting and something to be dealt with by her. I don't need Shay to be a villain or like to be Queen Goblin or something like that.
Right. Exactly. No, like let's like I said to you a few minutes ago, Dan, we need more of her. So let's put the work in. I mean, I know we got 5 issues of this run left. I don't know if in Joe Kelly's 847 Deaths of Spider-Man, if one of those deaths is his relationship with Shay, but I don't know. Like let's keep it going. You know, like let's keep it going.
Sure. So you know, Emilio Laiso has been did the art on this issue, and we've seen his work a handful of times during this run. But to me, this was like the best utilization of him
yes.
I think we've seen yet. Like if he needs a perfect calling card book, this is it. What do you think of the art in this story?
It was great. I mean, you had mentioned it a few times earlier in this episode in terms of like just the true character work that was done in his artwork here in terms of like, you know, Peter. I mean, I thought frankly all of the visuals of Peter with the waiter were hilarious. Like I thought it was just visually very funny. You know, like him like waving away the water and you know like it was good stuff. And then like you said, like the way it was visually conveyed, him like looking out the window, you know, like the fact that there wasn't anything out the window for him to look at initially. I mean, like these are all very important beats that, yes, it's also Zeb Wells scripting those beats, but like the art brings it home and like there's a lot of expression in these characters. I mean, this is a book that's minimal Peter in costume and like there was just a ton of visual emotion throughout. I mean, you know, reminded me of the Mark Bagley Ultimate run in terms of like just being able to tell a story with faces and reactions and just like the sequence of people looking at each other. I thought this was excellent visually. Yeah,
pay it the highest of compliments is comparing it to Mark Bagley and Ultimate Spider-Man, and I was going to say the same thing. There's like I think 2 or 3 pages where it's just like mirrored panels back and forth on their faces at the table as they're challenging each other. And I thought like those were all supremely well like acted by Laiso's pencils and inks. And I loved the recurring like visual motif of the hands on the table touching and Peter pulling away or coming back in. You know, with that, I thought that was a really great way to kind of like wordlessly communicate everything about it. You're right. The waiter, hilarious. The kiss moment is really solid. Like,
yeah,
you know, like put it up there with like some of the all-time kisses in Amazing Spider-Man.
If you see, he's got the bandages on his hand. and oh, I'm sorry. I'm going back in time here.
If anybody's going to become a villain in this story, it's the waiter, based on his reaction in that image. But
so you're saying the waiter is Kindred. Okay.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
yes.
got it.
I thought like too, like, there was a great blend of like romanticism, very, you know, round. I mean, Shay looks great, but it's also very awkward. Like the characters like feel, you know, just as awkward as you'd want from Amazing Spider-Man, and like very cleanly presented. I never looked at an image and didn't know what I was looking at.
Yep.
Like, and the kind of like dynamics of everything is really nice. But I wanted to give a shout out to colorist Bryan Valenza, who I think. There's no way for me to tell who is doing all of the like drawings outside the windows, but it does look like a colorist work of him like fleshing out the glowing lights of the city, and the way that he did the colors on this to make all the lights very bloom and soft gives it this kind of romanticism of the glowing orange interior and the cold blue and purple exterior of the city that like oozes a kind of like hazy comfort that made it very romantic, even if the actions weren't very romantic, and that the final images of them pulling out as the villains are watching them in their body language. You can see they're both laughing inside as their silhouettes and the warm colors. I thought, Emilio did a lot of work on drawing buildings and cars, but it was the color that I think gave this thing all the texture and feel that it needed. So I wanted to give that a shout out.
Excellent. Well, Dan, do you have a grade for this book?
Yeah, I'm going to give this one an A-.
Okay, I am just like a notch below you. I'm giving it a B+, but a very high B+.
Cool. Well, Mark, why don't you take us home?
Absolutely. Well, of course, it is that time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners, and of course the viewers for tuning in to this episode of the Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, this podcast exists because of listener support on Patreon. For only $3.99 a month, you can help support our show's existence while getting early episodes, including these reviews the same weeks the comics release, our reviews of Ultimate Spider-Man, exclusive artwork, and a ton of other bonuses. Thank you to everyone who already supports us and the work that we do. Plus, we wanted to extend a special thanks to Goodwin Forrester for upgrading his membership tier.
Thank you, Goodwin. Well, there's only a few months left of 2024, Dan, but we still really want to increase all the awesome work that we're doing over the course of this year and, of course, heading into 2025. So if you are already a patron or want to become one, please help us to meet our goals and make this a better podcast by considering supporting our show. Just go to AmazingSpiderTalk.com and click on the big old Patreon button to get started.
So, Mark, until we both choose not to swipe right on each other, what's our motto?
My goodness, Dan. With great podcasts, there must also come the Amazing Spider Talk.